The city is still dark when the first sound reaches you, a single hammer striking stone somewhere near the harbour, steady and patient, as though the walls themselves are calling the workers back to finish what was left undone. You lie still for a moment, feeling the cool morning air settle over the room, before your body remembers what the day requires of it. Welcome to History of Ordinary People. Here we leave behind the famous names and step into the lives of the people who built the world around them. Live the lives history forgot. You're a mason in the port city of Ostia, in the early years of the 2nd century after Christ, and your hands have shaped more stone than you could ever count. Today, like most days, you will help raise a wall that merchants will lean against, that children will run beside, that carts loaded with grain and wine will pass beneath without a second thought. But this morning, before any of that begins, a delivery of limestone waits at the site with a crack running through one block, and it will fall to you and the foreman to decide whether it becomes part of the wall or gets left behind. The blanket is rough against your skin as you push it aside and sit up in the dark. Your wife stirs beside you but does not wake fully, and you move quietly, feeling for your tunic in the dimness of the room. The wool is cool and slightly damp with the night air, and you pull it over your head before your feet find the packed earth floor. Somewhere in the house, your children sleep on, small shapes beneath their own blankets, and you resist the urge to check on them the way you do most mornings, knowing there will be time enough this evening. In the main room, a small fire still glows faintly from the night before, enough to see by if not enough to warm the space. You crouch beside it and coax a little more life from the embers, feeding in a handful of kindling until a thin flame rises. Bread from yesterday sits wrapped in cloth on the shelf, and you tear off a piece, the crust hard against your teeth until you soften it by chewing slowly. A few olives follow, salty and firm, and you eat standing the way you always do, your mind already drifting toward the site and the work waiting there. Your leather sandals rest by the door where you left them, and you push your feet into them one at a time, tightening the straps by feel more than sight. Your work belt hangs on its peg, and you settle it around your waist, feeling the familiar weight of it, the small tools that live there day after day, until they seem less like possessions and more like extensions of your own hands. The heavier tools, the chisels and the mallet, stay wrapped in cloth near the door, ready to be carried. Outside, the street is not yet crowded, but it is not empty either. A neighbour moves past with a covered basket, murmuring a greeting. You return without quite stopping. The air smells of cold stone and the faint smoke of early fires being lit throughout the district, and somewhere further off, gulls call over the harbour, restless even before the sun. You pull your cloak tighter against the morning chill and begin walking, your bundle of tools shifting against your side with each step. The route to the site is one your feet know without thinking, past the baker's shuttered stall, past the fountain where a woman is already filling a jug, past the low wall where stray cats sleep curled against the stone. The city feels half awake around you, caught between the stillness of night and the noise that will soon fill every street. By the time you reach the site, the sky has begun to lighten at its edges, just enough to make out the shapes of scaffolding and the stacked pale blocks of stone waiting to be worked. 2 other masons are already there, stamping their feet against the cool ground and talking in low voices. The apprentice arrives just behind you, still rubbing sleep from his eyes, and the foreman is crouched near the newest delivery of stone, running his hand slowly along one block as though reading something written into its surface. You set down your tools and walk over, and it is only as you draw closer that you see what has drawn his attention. A hairline crack running along the edge of the limestone, pale against the darker face of the block. The kind of flaw that could mean nothing, or could mean the difference between a wall that stands and one that does not. The foreman does not speak right away. He turns the block slightly, catching the growing light along its surface, and you crouch beside him without being asked, running your own fingers along the crack to feel whether it runs deep or only touches the skin of the stone. It is fine under your thumb, barely wider than a hair, and you press harder near its centre to see if it gives. It does not. Around you, the rest of the crew begins settling into the rhythms of the morning without waiting for a decision. The apprentice starts unstacking smaller stones from the delivery cart, setting them in careful rows according to size, the way he has been taught to do since his first week on site. 2 labourers work together, lifting a larger block, their voices low as they count together before straightening, the muscles in their forearms drawn tight with the effort. The sound of a mallet on chisel begins somewhere behind you, unhurried, almost rhythmic, as another mason starts dressing the face of a stone that arrived the day before. You stand and step back to look at the cracked block as a whole rather than only the floor itself. It is a good stone otherwise, dense and evenly cut, the kind that would normally go without question into the lower courses of the wall where the weight bears down hardest. The foreman rubs his jaw and glances toward the section of wall still under construction, tracing its line with his eyes as though measuring where such a stone might sit without the crack ever becoming a problem. He tells you to set it aside for now, not rejected, not yet accepted, simply set aside until there is time to think it through properly. You nod and help the apprentice move it to the edge of the yard, away from the stones already approved for use, and something in the way the boy watches you tells you he's trying to learn not just how to move stone but how to judge it, the way you once watched the masons before you. With the delivery unloaded and sorted, the real work of the morning begins. You gather your chisel and mallet and walk toward the section of wall where you left off the previous evening, a low but steadily rising course of limestone that will eventually support the roofline of a new warehouse meant to hold grain brought in from the countryside. The morning air is still cool enough that the stone feels almost cold beneath your palm as you run a hand along yesterday's work, checking the alignment with your eye before trusting it with your tools. You select a fresh block from the approved stack and set it on the trestle before you, angling it so the natural grain runs the way you want it to break. The chisel finds its place against the surface, guided more by feel than by sight at this hour, and the first strike of the mallet sends a small shard curling away, pale dust scattering across the back of your hand. The rhythm settles quickly, strike and turn, each blow shaping the stone a little closer to what the wall requires of it. Nearby, another mason works his own block with a different rhythm entirely, heavier and slower, the sound of his mallet a low counterpoint to your own quicker strikes. Somewhere past the wall, you hear the creak of cartwheels and the low complaint of an ox being led toward the warehouse district, and without looking up you know it carries grain, the kind that will one day sit inside the very building you are helping to raise. You do not think about it long. The stone in front of you asks for your attention, and you give it, turning the block slightly to check the new edge against your straight edge before continuing. By the time the sun has fully cleared the rooftops, your palms have taken on the familiar ache of the morning's work, and a fine layer of pale dust has settled over your forearms and the front of your tunic. The apprentice moves between the masons now, refilling the mortar trough where needed, watching closely as an older craftsman shows him how much water to add before the lime begins to bind. You glance over once, remembering your own first mornings learning the same lesson, and return to your stone without a word, letting the boy find his own way through it, as you once did. The sun climbs higher, and with it the heat begins to settle into the stone itself, until the blocks you handle no longer carry the coolness of morning, but instead hold a faint warmth that seeps into your palms. Sweat gathers at your hairline, and you wipe it away with the back of your wrist, careful not to smear lime dust into your eyes. Around you, the pace of the site has not slowed, but it has changed, each movement a little more deliberate now, each breath drawn a little deeper against the growing heat. The foreman calls a pause when the sun sits near its highest point, and the crew begins drifting toward the shade cast by a half-finished wall, tools set down with the particular care of men who know they will pick them up again soon. You find a seat on a low stack of stone, the surface still cool where the shade has kept the heat away, and unwrap the cloth bundle you brought from home. Bread again, though fresher than the morning's piece, along with a small portion of cheese and a handful of olives. Someone passes a skin of watered wine down the line, and you take your share before passing it on. The apprentice sits nearby, listening more than talking, as the older masons fall into the easy back and forth of men who have worked together long enough to no longer need much conversation to feel companionable. One of them mentions a delivery expected the following week. Another complains without real heat about the quality of a batch of lime, and a third simply eats in silence, eyes half closed against the brightness beyond the shade. You listen without fully joining in, your mind still turning over the cracked block sitting at the edge of the yard. The foreman finishes his meal before the others and walks over to where the stone still waits, crouching beside it once more. You watch him a moment longer than the rest, curious whether he has reached a decision, but he only studies the crack again in the stronger midday light, tracing its path with his thumb before standing and returning to the shade without a word. Whatever he's weighing, he's not ready to say it aloud yet, and you understand well enough not to press him. Breadcrumbs cling to your fingers, and you eat them anyway, the faint grit of stone dust mixing with the taste of the meal the way it does most days. It is not something you notice much anymore, only something that would feel strange in its absence. The apprentice wrinkles his nose slightly at his own dusty hands, and one of the older masons laughs, telling him he will stop noticing within a year, the way the rest of them stopped noticing long ago. When the meal is finished, no one rushes back to work, but no one lingers long either. The foreman stands first, stretching his shoulders before rolling them slowly, and the rest of the crew follows his lead, gathering tools and returning to the sections of wall they left behind. You pick up your chisel again, the handle warm now from the day's heat rather than cool from the morning, and run your thumb along its edge out of habit before setting it against the next block. The afternoon's work falls into a heavier rhythm than the morning's had. The stones waiting to be set are larger now, meant for a section of wall rising to shoulder height, and lifting them requires two men working in careful coordination rather than one working alone. You take your place beside another mason, and together you guide a block into position, adjusting it by fractions of an inch until it sits level against the course beneath it. The weight of it settles into your forearms and back, a familiar strain that will ease only once the stone is properly seated and your hands are free again. Mortar goes in next, spread carefully along the joint by the apprentice under close watching, his movements slower and more deliberate than an experienced hand would need, but steady enough that no one corrects him. You check the alignment once more with your straight edge, satisfied when it shows true, and move on to the next block waiting on the trestle. The wall grows by inches, but it grows, each stone a small, unremarkable addition to something that will long outlast the hands that placed it. It is deep into this rhythm, sweat now fully soaking through the back of your tunic and dust clinging to every exposed inch of skin, that the foreman finally calls you over, glancing once more toward the cracked block still resting at the edge of the yard. You set down your chisel and walk over, wiping your palms against your tunic before crouching beside him at the stone. He does not speak at first, only gestures for you to look again at the crack in the strong afternoon light, and you do, tracing it with your eye from one end to the other the way you did that morning. It has not changed, has not grown, has not deepened, but the foreman has clearly spent the day turning the question over all the same. He tells you what he has decided, and it is not what you expected. The block will not go into the lower courses where the weight bears heaviest, but it need not be discarded either. There is a section higher on the wall, near where the roof line will eventually rest, where the load is lighter and a hairline floor like this one is unlikely to ever become a true weakness. You nod slowly, seeing the sense in it, and together you carry the stone toward that section, its weight settling awkwardly between you until you find a shared rhythm for the lift. Setting it in place takes longer than an ordinary block, both of you checking and rechecking its position before either is satisfied. The foreman running his palm along the seam where it meets its neighbours, as though reassuring himself one final time. When it finally sits level and secure, he straightens and gives the wall a short, wordless nod, the kind that passes for approval among men who do not waste breath on praise. You feel a small, private satisfaction in it, the quiet kind that comes from watching a problem resolve itself through patience rather than haste. The afternoon continues on much as the morning did, stone after stone shaped and lifted and set, the wall inching upward with a slowness that would frustrate anyone who didn't understand that this is simply how walls are built, one block trusted to hold the weight of all the ones that will follow. Your shoulders ache in a way that has become familiar rather than unwelcome, and your hands have long since stopped registering the small nicks and scrapes that gather over a day of work with stone and tool. As the sun begins its slow drop toward the rooftops, a boy arrives at the edge of the site, calling out for one of the other masons, and you recognize him after a moment as the son of a neighbour, 2 streets from your own home. He's been sent to ask whether his father will be much longer, and the mason in question laughs and tells him to run home and say the same thing he says every evening, that he will be along once the wall lets him go. The boy grins and darts off again, and a few quiet chuckles follow him, the kind of small, ordinary exchange that threads through every long day of work. Not long after, a cart rattles past the edge of the site, drawn by a tired-looking mule, its bed loaded with fish still glistening faintly from the morning catch, the smell reaching you sharp and briny even over the dust and lime of the yard. You glance up just long enough to watch it pass toward the market district, already imagining the stalls it will soon fill, before returning your attention to the block beneath your hands. As the light begins to soften and lengthen across the yard, the foreman calls out that the day is nearly done, and the crew begins the familiar process of closing up the site. Tools are gathered and wrapped. The mortar trough is emptied and rinsed, and the newly set stones are given one final visual check before anyone is willing to call the day complete. You run your hand along the top of the wall's newest course, feeling for anything uneven, and find nothing that troubles you. The apprentice sweeps loose stone dust away from the base of the wall, his movements slower now with the fatigue of a full day's labour, and one of the older masons claps him once on the shoulder, telling him he did well enough for a day that included his first real lesson in mortar. The boy's tired face brightens slightly at that, and you remember again what it felt like to hear such words for the first time, how much weight a small acknowledgement could carry after a long day. You gather your own tools last, tying the cloth bundle closed and settling your work belt back into place before slinging everything over your shoulder. The wall stands taller than it did this morning, not by much, but by enough, and you allow yourself a brief moment to look at it before turning toward home, the ache in your back a quiet reminder of exactly how that extra height came to be. The walk home moves slower than the one that carried you to the site this morning, your legs heavy in the particular way that comes only from a full day spent lifting and setting stone. The streets are fuller now, filled with the smells of evening meals being prepared behind closed doors, smoke drifting up from countless small fires, voices calling between neighbours settling in for the night. You pass the fountain again, the same one from the morning, and stop this time to splash water over your face and forearms, watching pale streaks of lime dust run off and disappear into the stone basin below. The water is cool against your skin, and you linger a moment longer than necessary, letting it ease some of the day's heat from your face before continuing on. Your hands remain stained faintly white no matter how much you rub them, the mark of the trade settling into the creases of your palms the way it always does, a mark that will not fully wash away until tomorrow's work begins again and makes the effort pointless in the first place. When you reach home, the door is already open, and the smell of a cooking meal meets you before you even step inside. Your wife glances up from where she tends the small fire, taking in the dust still clinging to your tunic and the tiredness in your shoulders without needing to ask how the day went. Your children come rushing from the next room, and you crouch to meet them despite the ache in your legs, letting the younger one press a small stone offcut into your palm, proud of having found it near the doorway, certain it must be important simply because it resembles the stones you carry home dust from every evening. You admire it properly, turning it over as though it were a fine piece of work, and the boy beams before running off to find something else to show you. Your wife takes your cloak and tools without being asked, setting them by the door, and you settle onto the low bench near the fire, feeling the weight finally begin to lift from your shoulders now that the day's labour is truly behind you. The evening meal is simple, bread and a modest portion of stew, but it tastes better for the hunger built by hours of honest labour. You eat slowly, listening to your wife recount small pieces of her own day, the market prices, a neighbour's minor complaint, nothing urgent, nothing that demands more than half your attention, and yet it settles something in you all the same. The ordinary rhythm of a household continuing on regardless of what happened at the wall. Later, as the fire burns lower and the children are coaxed towards sleep, you sit a while longer in the quiet, feeling the day's aches settle into something closer to rest. Your shoulders remember the weight of stone. Your palms remember the grip of the chisel. Somewhere beneath all of it, a small satisfaction remains, quiet and unremarkable, the kind that comes only from watching a flawed thing find its place without becoming a failure. You think briefly of the cracked block, now resting invisibly within the wall, indistinguishable from every stone around it. Tomorrow, and every day after, people will pass beneath it without a single thought. Merchants leaning against warmed stone in the afternoon sun, children running past on errands, carts rolling through with grain and bread and wine bound for the market. None of them will ever know a decision was made there, a flaw considered and quietly resolved. The wall will simply stand as walls are meant to do, holding up more than anyone passing by will ever think to notice. You bank the fire low, checking once that your children sleep soundly, before finally lying down yourself, the ache in your body settling into a stillness that promises deep and uninterrupted rest. Tomorrow the wall will need you again, another course to rise, another set of stones to shape and set and trust. But for now, the day is finished. The wall stands a little taller, and sleep comes easily, the way it always does after honest work well done. Thank you for joining me for another journey into the past. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow the show so you never miss another ordinary life. Until next time, remember, every road, loaf of bread, fishing net, workshop, and home was built by hands history rarely recorded. This has been History of Ordinary People. Live the lives history forgot.